Hello and welcome to another day of English 2. I'm your online facilitator, Miss Abear. As a reminder, we are in a personal narrative unit through CommonLit. The greater unit is called Coming of Age, and we will write an argument at the end of this unit. But before we write an argument to the essential question, what experiences lead us from childhood adulthood, we are going to write a personal narrative at our mid-unit. And for that personal narrative, you are going to describe an experience that's been part of your transition out of childhood. When deciding on a moment to write about, you want to consider the following: a loss that you experienced, a realization or difficult truth you learned, a new responsibility that you had to take on, or a risk you decided to take. That is going to be your mid-unit task. Now, before we get started into today's lesson, yesterday you were reading Growing Up Key Moments, and you were looking at those ideas that help shape who we are. And when we think about those experiences, they really are the everyday experiences that propel us out of childhood and into adulthood. Today we're going to read Through the Tunnel. It is about a boy who pushes himself to do something daring. But before we read that, I want you to turn and talk with your neighbor after I read this quote. You will never experience personal growth if you fear taking chances. So do you agree or disagree? Why or why not? Take a minute to turn and talk with your neighbor about that quote. Good. Now we are going to look at another question. Which is worse, playing it safe, taking absolutely no risks, or taking risks but possibly failing? So raise your hand and share those answers. Those are some fantastic ideas, and you guys are really taking seriously our essential questions, and I have no doubt that you're going to be ready to answer both the personal narrative as well as the text at the very end of the unit for your argument. So today we're going to focus on 3 different skills. You're going to analyze, determine, and then analyze again. So first we're going to analyze how complex characters and specific plot points develop a theme. Then we're going to determine how setting determines or develops suspense and contributes to our understanding of a character. And also we're going to analyze the way symbols and specific details develop our understanding of a character. And we will do that through this text that we're reading called Through the Tunnel. We do need to understand that dramatic moments and descriptive details create suspense in a story. So as we read, we're going to ask ourselves, what descriptive details or dramatic moments do we notice? What effects do those details have on readers? Now I'm asking you to consider some additional questions, but we're going to pause here and let's remind ourselves of those signposts, those contrasts and contradictions. I want you to take a second with your neighbor, and what is that question that we ask ourselves when we notice a character do or say something that is opposite of what we expect or what they have been doing the whole time? Good. Now let's look at those aha moments, and I want you to turn and talk with your neighbor about that question that we ask ourselves. Good. Next, the tough questions. What do we do when we come across a tough question? And what is that question that we ask? Great. That's right. Good job. Words of the wiser. What question do we ask ourselves when a character who is sometimes older and absolutely wiser pulls the character aside and gives them some life advice? What question do we ask ourselves when that happens? That's right, we sure do. Again and again, when we see images, when we see situations, when we see words pop up over and over again, what's that question we ask? That's right. And then the last one is those memory moments. What question do we ask ourselves when we're reading a text and the author takes a minute to do a flashback? What question do we ask ourselves? That's right. So we're going to keep those questions in mind as we read, as well as this additional one of what descriptive details or dramatic moments do we notice. So when we're doing those, again, you can use DD for dramatic details or DM for dramatic moments. Just like you use the signpost, you have different symbols that you use to mark those. So before we get started, your teacher should be giving you a copy of Through the Tunnel that looks like this. It will identify the purpose for reading as well as some vocabulary. Don't forget about that vocabulary, because at the end of the week, you're going to be taking a test. So I suggest you begin studying for that. So Through the Tunnel is a suspenseful story that describes one boy's quest to follow the lead of a group of older boys and swim through a tight underwater tunnel. What seems like a small physical task ends up being the accelerant that pushes him to gain independence and a new self-awareness. So as we read, I want you to focus on how the author builds suspense through those details. So as you have the copy, you will see the questions along the side. You'll see here the whole group reading. So while I'm reading, I want you to be marking those places with a signpost, also marking those moments for those descriptive details and descriptive moments. So follow along with me as I read. Make sure you have your pencil in your hand. Going to the shore on the first morning of the vacation, the young English boy stopped at a turning of the path and looked down at a wild and rocky bay, and then over to the crowded beach he knew so well from other years. His mother walked on in front of him, carrying a bright striped bag in one hand. Her other arm, swinging loose, was very white in the sun. The boy watched that white, naked arm and turned his eyes, which had a frown behind them, toward the bay and back again to his mother. When she felt he was not with her, she swung around. "Oh, there you are, Jerry," she said. She looked impatient, then smiled. "Why, darling, would you rather not come with me? Would you rather?" She frowned conscientiously, worrying about what amusements he might secretly be longing for, which she had been too busy or too careless to imagine. He was very familiar with that anxious, apologetic smile. Contrition sent him running after her, and yet as he ran, he looked over his shoulder at the wild bay, and all morning as he played on the safe beach, he was thinking of it. Next morning, when it was time for the routine of swimming and sunbathing, his mother said, "Are you tired of the usual beach, Jerry? Would you like to go somewhere else?" "Oh, no," he said quickly, smiling at her out of that unfailing impulse of contrition, a sort of chivalry. Yet, walking down the path with her, he blurted out, "I'd like to go and have a look at those rocks down there." She gave the idea her attention. It was a wild-looking place, and there was no one there. But she said, "Of course, Jerry. When you've had enough, come to the big beach, or just go straight back to the villa if you like." She walked away, that bare arm, now slightly reddened from yesterday's sun, swinging, and almost ran after her again, feeling it unbearable that she should go by herself. But he did not. All right, we're going to stop there for a second. There is a question in the margin that I need you to answer first, and then I want you to turn and talk with your neighbor. So what are the boy's conflicting feelings about being with his mother? So answer that question in your margin, and then turn and talk with your neighbor, and we will continue reading. Good job. All right, now we're moving on, and we're going to read paragraphs 7 through 11, and there are some questions in the margins, and we will pause at those questions so that you can answer those as well. So follow along with me, and again, don't forget to be annotating your text with those symbols for your notice and note signpost, as well as that other question that we're supposed to be looking for. And what are we looking for? That's right, descriptive details and descriptive moments. Good. Follow along with me as I read out loud. She was thinking, of course, he's old enough to be safe without me. Have I been keeping him too close? He mustn't feel he ought to be with me. I must be careful. He was only a child, 11 years old. She was a widow. She was determined to be neither possessive nor lacking in devotion. She went worrying off to her beach. As for Jerry, once he saw that his mother had gained her beach, he began the steep descent to the bay. From where he was, high among red-brown rocks, it was a scoop of moving blush green fringed with white. As he went lower, he saw that spread among small promontories and inlets of rough, sharp rock, and the crisping, lapping surface showed stains of purple and darker blue. Finally, as he ran sliding and scraping down his last few yards, he saw an edge of white surf and the shallow, luminous movement of water over white sand, and beyond that, a solid, heavy blue. So we're going to stop a second because the text is asking us to find evidence. So we're going to underline 3 details that support the idea that the bay is wild. So take a second, go back to the text and underline those 3 details. And you might have already marked them with that descriptive detail moment, but go back if you have not. Good job. Now we're going to continue reading at paragraph 8 and go through 11. When we get to 11, we're going to stop again and answer another question. All right, follow along with me. He ran straight into the water and began swimming. He was a good swimmer. He went out fast over the gleaming sand, over a middle region where rocks lay like discolored monsters under the surface. And then he was in the real sea, a warm sea where irregular cold currents from the deep water shocked his limbs. When he was so far out that he could look back and not only the little bay, but past the promontory that was between it and the big beach, he floated on the buoyant surface and looked for his mother. There she was, a speck of yellow under an umbrella that looked like a slice of an orange peel. He swam back to the shore, relieved at being sure he was there, but all at once lonely. On the edge of a small cape that marked the side of the bay from the promontory was a loose scatter of rocks. Above them, some boys were stripping off their clothes. They came running, naked, down to the rocks. The English boy swam toward them, but kept his distance at a stone's throw. They were aware of that coast. All of them were burned smooth, dark brown, and speaking a language he did not understand. To be with them, of them, was a craving that filled his whole body. He swam a little closer. They turned and watched him with narrowed, alert, dark eyes. Then one smiled and waved. It was enough. In a minute, he had swum in and was on the rocks beside them, smiling with a desperate, nervous supplication. They shouted cheerful greetings at him. And then, as he persevered his nervous, uncomprehending smile, they understood that he was a foreigner, strayed from his own beach, and then they proceeded to forget him. But he was happy. He was with them. They began diving again and again from a high point into a well of blue sea between rough, pointed rocks. After they had dived and come up, they swam around, hauled themselves up, and waited their turn to dive again. They were big boys, men to Jerry. He dived and they watched him, and when he swam around to take his place, they made way for him. And he felt he was accepted, and he dived again, carefully, proud of himself. All right, so we're going to take a second, and I want you to answer the question that's in the margin. That's, what is Jerry's attitude towards the boys? Once you've answered it in the margin, I want you to turn and talk with your neighbor. All right, now I'm going to give you an opportunity to do a little bit of partner reading. So we've done that before with this unit. So what I want you to do is read paragraphs 12 through 17 with a partner. When you finish reading, I want you to answer the question, what do Jerry's reactions to the boys in paragraphs 13 through 17 suggest about him? So I'm going to give you a minute to read that with your partner and answer that question. Okay, so you finished up your partner reading, and I hope that you've answered that question. We're going to move forward to another whole group read. We're going to read paragraphs 18 through 22, and we have another question to answer. So again, you should be marking your text with those signposts as well as those descriptive details and moments. So follow along with me as I read out loud. It seemed to him that a long time had passed, and he swam out to where he could see his mother. Yes, she was still there, a yellow spot under an orange umbrella. He swam back to the big rock, climbed up, and dived into the blue pool among the fanged and angry boulders. Down he went until he touched the wall of the rock again, but the salt was so painful in his eyes that he could not see. He came back to the surface, swam to the shore, and went back to the villa to wait for his mother. Soon she walked slowly up the path, swinging her striped bag, the flushed, naked arm dangling beside her. "I want some swimming goggles," he panted, defiant and beseeching. She gave him a patient, inquisitive look as she said cautiously, "Well, of course, darling." But now, he must have them this minute and no other time. He nagged and pestered until she went with him to a shop. As soon as she had bought the goggles, he grabbed them from her hand as if she were going to claim them for herself, and was off, running down the steep path to the bay. Jerry swam out to the big barrier rock, adjusted the goggles, and dived. The impact of the water broke the rubber-enclosed vacuum, and the goggles came loose. He understood that he must swim down to the base of the rock from the surface of the water. He fixed the goggles tight and firm, filled his lungs, and floated face down on the water. Now he could see. It was as if he had eyes of a different kind, fish eyes that showed everything clear and delicate and wavering in the bright water. Now, I want you to answer these two questions on your paper for paragraphs 19 through 22. Write the answer to what is Jerry's motivation for wanting to swim through the tunnel, and then find 3 pieces of evidence that show Jerry's dedication to the idea of swimming through the tunnel. So I'm going to give you a minute to answer that, and then we'll come back and do some more whole class reading. Good job. Now we're going to read paragraphs 23 through 26, and we have another question to answer. Follow along with me as I read, and again, I want you to mark those places in the passage that are the signposts as well as those descriptive details and descriptive moments. Paragraph 23 is where we're starting. Under him, 6 or 7 feet down, was a floor of perfectly clean, shining white sand, rippled firm and hard by the tides. 2 grayish shapes steered there like long, rounded pieces of wood or slate. They were fish. He saw them nose toward each other, poise motionless, make a dart forward, swerve off, and come around again. It was like a water dance. A few inches above them, the water sparkled as if sequins were dropping through it. Fish again, myriads of minute fish, the length of his fingernail, were drifting through the water, and in a moment he could feel the innumerable tiny touches of them against his limbs. It was like swimming in flaked silver. The great rock of the big boys had swum through rose sheer out of the white sand, black, tufted lightly with greenish weed. He could see no gap in it. He swam down to its base. Again and again he rose, took a big chestful of air, and went down. Again and again he groped over the surface of the rock, feeling it, almost hugging it in desperate need to find the entrance. And then, while he was clinging to the black wall, his knees came up and shot his feet out forward, and they met no obstacle. He had found the hole. He gained the surface, clambered about the stones that littered the barrier rock until he found a big one, and, with this in his arms, let himself down to the side of the rock. He dropped with the weight straight to the sandy floor. Clinging tight to the anchor of stone, he lay on his side and looked under the dark shelf at the place where his feet had gone. He could see the hole. It was an irregular, dark gap, but he could see He could not see deep into it. He let go of his anchor, clung with his hands to the edges of the hole, and tried to push himself in. He had got his head in, found his shoulders jammed, moved them sideways, and was inside as far as his waist. He could see nothing ahead. Something soft and clammy touched his mouth. He saw a dark frond moving against the grayish rock, and panic filled him. He thought of octopuses, of clinging weed. He pushed himself out backward and caught a glimpse, as he retreated, of harmless tentacle of seaweed drifting in the mouth of the tunnel. But it was enough. He reached the sunlight, swam to the shore, and lay on the diving rock. He looked down into the blue wall of water. He knew he must find his way through that cave or hole or tunnel and out the other side. So now we're going to stop, and I want to poll you, and your teacher will kind of get those results. If you were Jerry, would you keep trying or would you stop? Be prepared to defend your response. I hope that you guys enjoyed that discussion that you had amongst your class and that poll of which side that you would take. So good job, and let's move forward. The next section is going to be an independent reading. You're going to read paragraphs 27 through 32. When you finish reading, answer the questions about paragraphs 1 and 32. One is the author describes Jerry as having a curious, most unchildlike persistence. How is this different from Jerry's earlier behavior? And then you're going to find evidence that illustrate that change, and you're going to underline those pieces of evidence. Once you've done that for today, that is going to be the end of our day for you. If you have additional time, your teacher either is going to give you time to work on that vocabulary packet or study your vocabulary terms, because that test is coming up. I hope that you have a great day, and until next time, happy reading.